This is the Automotive Repair Podcast Network.
Welcome everyone to yet another episode of Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z. I'm Matt Fonzland. An idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious. The smallest seed of an idea can grow. It can grow to define or destroy you. That and more after a word from our sponsors, Autel and Pico Technology. This episode of Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z is brought to you by Autel. Autel is a global developer and manufacturer of award-winning professional automotive diagnostic tools and service equipment, trusted by technicians, educators, and shop owners across North America. With diagnostics at their core, Autel's real-world solutions support repair workflows ranging from full-system vehicle diagnostics to servicing the most advanced automotive technologies. What sets Autel North America apart is the team behind the tools. Dedicated experts across sales, training, and technical support, each bringing deep, hands-on experience supporting professional technicians. When questions arise, you're working with people who understand the vehicles, the procedures, and the real-world demands of modern repair. Whether diagnosing complex drivability concerns, servicing TPMS systems, validating repairs, or working with ADAS and advanced safety technologies, Autel tools are engineered to support accurate, efficient repairs in strict accordance with OEM procedures and standards. To learn more about Autel and their diagnostic solutions, visit autel.com, autel.com. I guess I have to go back again to reference a video short that I uploaded or had uploaded for me, really, because I don't do much of anything on my own. But there'll be a link below for the episode or for that short, really. I guess I hope you listen to it or watch it, not so much just to view it or anything like that, but honestly to get your take on it. It's had quite a bit of activity, but I want more. I want to get a better handle on what is the reality, what's really out there, because I do wonder if I'm not somewhat sheltered where, geographically where I live and what shops are surrounding me, being in a not really metropolitan area, more, I don't know if it is technically rural. Well, I have to say, where I live, my house is definitely rural. I don't know about where the shop is so much being rural, but close enough. Certainly surrounded by rural communities and roughly an hour away north and south of more metropolitan type areas. And the video is about referencing a phone call I got from a friend who works for a local dealership, and he wanted to borrow a tool, piece of equipment, really a tool for depinning a connector. And I don't want to just go over the whole video for you, but ultimately it was the service department did not possess what I would think would be an essential tool, but I guess the manufacturer would define what's essential or not. And then I'm not even sure exactly what the rules are for that. Do they get sent the essential tools? And if they're lost, broken, I guess those would be the two main things. It's up to the dealership to replace them. Nobody's really keeping track of an inventory of tools. The dealership or the service department is not investing in this depinning tool or the entire kit, and the technical specialist, mechanical specialist is considering buying their own. I can see some economic logic to that if they're guaranteed to get all the work and there's enough of that work, depending connectors, whatever, replacing connectors themselves instead of harnesses. If there's a fair bit of that work and they're guaranteed to get all of it, maybe that makes a lot of sense. That investment pays big dividends. To me, that's an interesting risk. And why is an employee taking it? That's where it starts falling apart for me. And then the question ultimately is, how many of you are required to buy equipment, tools? And then where is the line? What's the threshold to where now that's a shop thing? Like, I get it. That I think most of us agree most shops buy the hoists, air compressors, maybe a scan tool. I guess we don't really do brake lathes so much anymore, but if there's a brake lathe to be owned, the shop probably bought it. Maybe a press, tire changer, wheel balancer, alignment machines, AC machines, maybe, one AC machine. But you start getting below that, whatever that means, I guess, physical size and maybe cost. When does it start shifting to the requirement of the mechanical or technical specialist? And that's where I feel like the argument for employees being required to own equipment starts falling apart. Is how do you define that? And then what's the logic of owning a business that you advertise certain capabilities, but the shop itself, employees aside, like the actual person to do the job aside, the shop itself is ill-equipped to be able to do that. Like, just for an extreme, if you're advertising that you do wheel alignments, but you don't have an alignment machine, how does that work? And then again, at a terrible extreme, you have a technical specialist or mechanical specialist who is now invested in some sort of, we'll just say, an alignment system. Okay. Maybe not the whiz bang top of the line, but something that's still expensive to do wheel alignments. I mean, I don't know. That maybe some of you are thinking that's a genius idea, and I've just wrecked some careers. There's a certain absurdity to that. A shop advertising that they replace tires, that they do tires, but they don't have a tire machine or a wheel balancer. Or advertising that you do AC service, but you don't own any AC equipment. Like, it's falling on the employee to purchase these. And we see this with scan tools and diagnostic equipment, and maybe and I struggle with the word, right? Like, I don't know what a good word would be. Lower level things of, we need to do a timing chain on this vehicle. The shop doesn't own the proper alignment, like timing chain alignment or cam alignment tools. Is the mechanical specialist looking to buy that to be able to complete this job? And is the shop doing something where basically it will help purchase the tool, but then take so much money out of their checks, if you will, to pay it back, and then it is the specialist's tool? Is this like the reality? Is that what's really out there? I mean, don't get me wrong. When I got into this, the first couple shops I worked at, you were required, expected, which I guess is the same meaning, to own, again, for lack of a better term, basic. You were expected to have the basic tools, wrenches, sockets, stuff like that. And screwdrivers, of course, stuff like that. But you start getting into more of the special tools, a specialty socket, a puller of some sort. Then the shops typically took that on. So evidently, maybe I'm just sheltered, and I guess I'm not looking to make excuses, but try to explain it. That is something I'm not familiar with. And yet, looking at many of the comments, it's common that they're buying more than just basic hand tools, that they have quite the inventory of equipment that would normally be associated with the business owning, the service department, the shop, the facility owning, the shop owner owning, or manager, usually an owner, right? That it wouldn't fall on the employee, but yet that's what happens. To be able to do the jobs correctly or efficiently enough to make time to justify, to do efficiently, to maximize income, and then hoping you're going to use this tool or a piece of equipment again. I don't know. I used this word and I've already used it, but I used it multiple times in the video. I just find this absolutely absurd. I'm not sure the right and wrong of it with owning the basics, wrenches and sockets and ratchets and stuff. I understand to a point wanting to own your own. It's yours. No one else should be using it, at least without permission. You can buy what you like. I mean, I get it. But also from a business / managerial perspective, if part of my purpose is to take care of my people, and if I really believe that if I take care of my people, they will take care of, quote unquote, my customers or the customers, then one feature of that is to try to maximize their incomes, their expendable incomes, if you will, which is maybe a bad term because that's really up to them to a degree, but at least maximize their take-home pay, minimize their financial responsibilities to do the jobs that they're hired to do. I do that in exchange of help the shop make the most of ethical profit you can. I firmly believe that. I mean, it's been repeated on this podcast over and over and over, maybe ad nauseum. I don't know. But I can't buy into this idea of expecting fairly significant investments to do the jobs we're advertising we do. I don't know what to relate it to. I'm just thinking about, it would be more like independent contractor level stuff where, barber shops, I think, rent space or a chair to an employee, or I don't know if they're even considered an employee, but they're under the banner of whatever the barbershop's name, and then they have their own business practice underneath that banner and a place to do it, and the power of the name of the facility or business to draw in. But then for that barbershop, what if you're advertising like hair coloring or certain styles? I don't know. And you don't do that, or no one else in the building can accept you because you've made investments in training or equipment to do it. I don't know how to wrap my head around that. And my concern with it, this is true. Like, it's true that businesses, specifically repair shops, are shifting that responsibility onto employees. And there isn't again, for lack of a better word, it's probably a horrific word, but a lack of a lucrative return. And you're building up these inventories of tools and equipment. Why wouldn't they just quit and start their own business? Which is, in the comments, that's what happens a fair bit, is a lot of them have made significant investments in tools and equipment and then just decided, I have everything, I'm just going to open my own shop. And they do so. And, the ones that comment always are, it's the best thing they ever did. Now they're making so much more than they did as a employee. And for them, I'm guessing it's true. I'm sure they could lie and we'd see certain handles or names associated with success, but is it that important? Or for them, they did, but statistically, how many failed? And businesses in general, like startup businesses, fail at a whatever rate it is. I guess we're not going to go into that. It's not important, but they do fail. We're not seeing people post or respond comments like, yeah, I built up this huge inventory of equipment, started my own shop, and it failed epically in a year or two. And I went back to working in a shop and happy to do so. That doesn't seem to happen, or we don't see that. People don't, at least make comments like that. If it's true, I guess I'd like to know it's true. But I have a suspicion as they either go into business for themselves, succeed or fail, or if they go into business for themselves and fail, they're not going back to work in a shop. So they're out of the industry. Or they don't go and open their own shop and they're out of the industry. I think that happens a fair bit. It makes sense because we've unwittingly set the brass ring to be ownership. And there's an economical sense in a business owner or manager, but really we have to focus mainly on owners. Managers in this case would be those tasked with executing these strategies or desires of ownership. But there's a really sound economical reason for business owners in general, but shop owners, to make it, again, for lack of a better term, lucrative enough to be okay being an employee, make enough money, have money for the future, retirement. And I guess I don't say this with any kind of, I don't think there's any nefarious intent with this. Okay. So I don't mean this as a negative in the fact that take advantage of risk aversion. I'm not trying to say that the shop owner, the evil shop owner, is trying to take advantage of your risk aversion to keep you from opening your own shop and treating you like dirt. I'm just saying, if I pay you well enough, if I give you enough money, if I compensate you well enough, benefits, whatever they all mean, right? And we could go on and on and on with all what that is. But if that's good enough, then you're looking at opening your own place and the risk involved versus what you feel is stable and good, comfortable, stable. You probably won't open your own shop. And there's the reason to do that is really a couple things pop into my head, right? And I guess I'm making this up as I go a little bit, but the reality is one, the talent pool. We're talking about a lack of qualified technicians, right? It's hard to find good help. And if you have good help, it doesn't make a lot of sense to let them go open their own shop. And then you've lost that talent and they're going after talent eventually. So you've shrunk the talent pool. That doesn't make any sense. And then the other thing is, and I find that, I guess I'm jumping a little bit here, jumping around, but not too long ago, there was a thread on one of the professional forums. I think it's more shop management, shop ownership type of a forum or Facebook group, to be honest. I'm talking about discussing with clients or customers when enough is enough on their vehicles. When is this a good investment to fix it? And when is it a bad investment? And customers often jumping to the conclusion that the value of the vehicle is $5,000. It makes no sense to spend $7,000 to put the new engine, transmission, whatever, to do the repairs. They're not taking into account replacement costs, or maybe even better yet, a better calculation, albeit maybe a little more difficult to come by and calculate, is cost per mile. And then they'll find the investment in the repair far outweighs the investment on a more steady or predictable payment every month versus I've just dropped $7,000 on this vehicle to fix it up and I drove it for 3 months and now it needs this. That unpredictability, even if the cost per mile is lower to keep repairing it, that unpredictability is very off-putting. Don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But I find this logic somewhat comparable in if I have an employee or I have my favorite word, culture, built up where it's viewed, the brass ring, the real way to make a nice living and live comfortably and, I don't know, have it made is to own your own shop. Then the owner with this thought, this strategy, or again, this could be part of the shadow game where they're not aware of this. They're not aware that this is what is being demonstrated or communicated. even if it's wrong, that you're no longer factoring in the replacement cost of that loss of an employee. And don't get me wrong, I've seen articles, I've heard presentations by coaches and whatnot about, when it comes time to, review an employee and talk about pay raises, or they come in and ask for a raise. First thing to do is you start to graph out and plot out production. And that, I get it. Like, that makes sense. But then you have to consider, how much would it cost to replace that person? When they leave, if they put in their notice, 2 weeks notice, they're gone. Going to be able to have somebody in that spot doing the same things in 2 weeks? Are they going to do it as well? Are they going to do it better? And then, are you really going to have somebody in 2 weeks? How long are you vacant? How long are you without that production? And then you do get somebody in. What if they're not nearly as good? And now you're trying to get them trained up to wherever that person was. There's a steep replacement cost. And then, of course, if it ends up a revolving door, now you have that reputation to deal with. If it gets around that you have a revolving door, eventually people are just not going to come. They don't care what's on the inside, because they see all these people go in, work a few months, work a couple years, and then they're out. Why is that? I am extraordinarily interested to know how many of you were expected and make heavy investments in equipment. Me personally, I had my basic hand tools from when I went to my 2-year college. Like, that was part of the program. Even you got an equipment list, and you could go to various vendors: Snap-on, Matco, Mac, Napa were the heavy hitters. Sears was another one, to buy all these equipment, all these tools. The most expensive single piece was probably the roll around toolbox, and then after that was probably the Fluke 87 or 88 multimeter, digital multimeter. After that, it was, ratchets, sockets, stuff like that, the basics. So I had that. And then when I started working for the first couple of shops I really started working for, I would end up buying some specialty tools, but building up arsenals of, at the time, pneumatic was really the way. Cordless was very unreliable, short battery lives, not very powerful. So pneumatic was still the way to go. So I was buying more and more pneumatic tools, ratchets, impacts. And then I ended up working for a shop that bought almost everything. There wasn't a whole lot. Maybe, again, if there was something that the shop only had 1 or 2 of and is something I would use a lot, I might buy my own. Or there are certain things that I just liked another version of that I would buy myself. And then, my ego is what drove me to buy a lot of diagnostic tools, like scan tools and scopes, stuff like that. That was 100% ego driven, not required. The shop didn't require me to do that. And as time went on through various shops, seeing what it meant to have certain capabilities, the shops offered to take more and more of that responsibility, or work out some sort of a deal that would help me recoup faster. So by and large, I was pretty insulated from the heavy investments. But did that still stop me from making heavy investments? No, because I think the reality is, at one point I was pretty close to or in excess of 6 figures for tools and equipment. I really didn't buy much for toolboxes. I didn't spend much with that, but where the money was spent was scan tools, diagnostic tools, equipment, stuff like that. And I bought a lot of it, especially scan tools, because I wanted to be able to do stuff. And did it pay dividends? The dividend would have been, I was doing that stuff long before most people in my region were. So it gave me a huge leg up, and then reputation, I suppose. I just don't know that it was a smart move. it may have worked out. I don't know if that means it was a good move, if you get my meaning. So I keep saying it, but I really want to hear, what have you had to buy? What do you think you should buy? What do you feel is the right way? Should employees be expected to buy anything? Because Riverside right now, the shop I'm at, that I'm shop manager for, that we don't require anyone buy anything. We've had, newbies, if you will, where we have bought the little tool or bought the toolbox, roll cabinet, outfitted it 100%, and they work for us for however long. It's all kind of worked out. And after that time, it's theirs. We still have employees that buy their own tools, but I mean, it's their money. They can do whatever they want. They're just not required to. And a few of them I've had to go have discussions with because they have purchased something that really should be a shop tool. Either try to buy it from them, have bought from them, so they aren't shouldering it. And if it's something they really, really want, that if they're going to use it on something done in the shop, that somehow the shop is trying to make things right. So yeah, I would really like to know, where do you feel that line is? Is there a line? Where is that line? How many of you have made massive, massive investments in equipment? And is that what led you to open your own shop? And has everyone that's opened their own shop succeeded? Yeah. I really, really look forward to the comments section. If you do watch the video, or even if you don't, check out the comments there. Comment on there if you like. It would be really great. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a like. It really helps the channel. Subscribe so you get alerted for new content. And yeah, in the spirit of a comment I had made in the video about possessing a fair number of vintage scan tools, which was really like, pre-OBD2 or early OBD2 factory scan tools, I thought I would do a Mount Rushmore of vintage diagnostic tools. And again, you get tripped up with what's my favorite versus what is really like the Mount Rushmore. So with that, I think one I will put up there is the Allen Smart Scope, or Smart Engine Analyzer, the SEA. If you haven't seen one, they're tall, they're big. They have, like, I guess you can buy them in different configurations, honestly, but many of them had like 3 or 4 banks, if you will, or almost they're modules that are different levels. So that, and you have a touch screen with a pen, and you would do some automated tests, like essentially cranking current, relative compression, and then it had like a oscilloscope, a analog oscilloscope. It would do vacuum and ignition, of course. It was pretty. It's a very pretty scope. Exhaust gas analyzer, which I got burned by. There was a 2-gas configuration that did carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons. Still okay enough, I guess, for like head gasket testing, but honestly, 4-gas is the way to go. 5, I suppose, is arguably better yet, but 4 is great. Not knowing that I had purchased one that had 2-gas. That was a surprise. So yeah, that's going up. The next one, it was built by Edge, but sold with the Sun machines. Namely, I think it had to be like the Sun 300 and up. So I think there's like the Sun 300, maybe a Sun 400 and a Sun 450. Maybe there was a 350 in there. I don't remember. Or maybe it was just the Sun 300 and then the Sun 450. But they were PC-based engine analyzers. And that was fine. Like, those were good machines. And Sun had many good machines. The MEA, the MCA, MCS, and then I think an MDA. But this Edge system, you could buy harnesses to tee in with the PC, or engine control module, I should say. I'm sure some were PCM, so engine ECM or PCM. It would tee into it, and it had some automated tests. I remember at one time, a shop I had worked at for a long time, if it matters, it was Preeb's Repair. And I was using scopes and current probes and all that. And I was, without the special tool from General Motors, finding the low impedance / shorted Multec injectors with either low inductive kicks, or you could see the current waveform, right? So I was nailing these all left and right. And a lot of other shops struggled with this because if you couldn't get to the injectors fast enough when they're hot and failing, they would pass a resistance test with flying colors. If you knew how to, not that it was so complicated, but if you knew to cycle them a bunch, or, power them up, power and ground to get them hot and fail, you might miss them. But one shop was very good about finding them. And I was asking them one time how they were finding them, what were they using? Because I guess I knew they had the Sun machine, but I didn't know if they were using the scope portion. And they showed me where they bought the harness and teed into the engine control module, and it ran a battery of tests, and it load tested the injectors, and they were finding them. I thought that was cool as all get out. I don't know how expensive. I think it was quite expensive. It was quite the investment to get the edge system and then the various harnesses. I mean, probably nothing compared to nowadays, certainly with pin numbers, but also just sheer configurations. But dang, I thought that was so cool. So that's going, the sheer cool factor, and maybe ahead of its time. I think, manufacturer specific. I think SBDS did something very similar for Ford. They just didn't have those type of issues. But the automated tests like that was pretty next level. It's somewhat interesting. We didn't see more and more manufacturers going that way, where you had maybe like a PC based big system. I know some of them we did. Like, we really did see some of it going that way, but like ultimately it's not what we've seen. So I find that interesting, but I think ahead of its time and maybe a little too cost prohibitive to become mainstream. But I think that's got to go up. Third, how do you not put a Fluke 87 up there? How many freaking cars has that fixed? I suppose you could make an argument for like the 88 that was a little more automotive specific, but for all around testing, and how many manufacturers based a lot of their material on that tool? I think, without trying to cop out on just a generic multimeter, to name one, the 87, it would still hold its own to this day as a meter. I can't bring myself to buy a straight up multimeter. It would have to be a Megger. I can't bring myself to buy a straight digital multimeter. It would have to do something special. So most of I would use like Vantage Pros. Be careful, that'll end up on the freaking list. I might have accidentally talked myself into that. I'll think about it. But honestly, the 87, I think that deserves a nod. So we're up to 3. We got one more. Man, the Vantage Pro, it's superior. We're talking about the Rushmore, right? The Rushmore of presidents is like founding. We're going to have to go back one. The Snap-on Vantage. The Vantage Pro is superior. It is. But I think the Vantage came out. I could be wrong. Maybe I should look this up before I just blab this. But I think the Vantage was really the first of its kind. Handheld, 2 channels. Screen definition was less than desirable, but a power graphing meter, so that it was kind of plotting min-max to a degree. It was looking for the greatest change and plotting out and graphing, histograph, if you will, all of the measurements, ohms, amps, or resistance in ohms, ohms being the scale, resistance, current, duty cycle, pulse width. Like, it was, you had the OTC perception around, but I want to say that was the answer to the Vantage. I don't think that it was before the Vantage. The perception was all right too. slightly different strategy, still a power graphing meter, but if I recall, they used some mathematics for almost statistics that had a threshold drawn, like an envelope drawn or calculated around the signal, and anything that exceeded that got plotted or was sure to be plotted. I'm thinking the Vantage was first. So yeah, for vintage diagnostic equipment, the SCA, I'm sure there's Sun machines like the Sun one or the Bear 100, Sun machines, Bear machines that came before. We had a lot of those big monster engine analyzers, but I don't know. The SCA was kind of special. Thing would pull codes on a GM OBD1. Now that I think about it, adapters to tee into the ignition control modules. It could be used on anything, but it could be made much more specific to GM. I think it was at one time the GM essential tool, one that they really did have, unlike some of their deep pitting tools. So yeah, SCA, Edge Systems, and the Fluke 87 and the Snap-on Vantage. Let me know what you think. I very much appreciate you guys listening. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Autel and Pico Technology. Thank you to the Automotive Repair Podcast Network. And until next time, take care.
You've been listening to Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z with Matt Fonslow on the Automotive Repair Podcast Network. Download our exclusive podcast app at automotiverepairpodcastnetwork.com because the best conversations in the industry start here. Want Matt to cover a specific topic? Check the show notes for his email. Your input matters.